This is People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. In each episode, writer and educator Sandy Carlson talks with a person who has been influenced by poetry and become a poet or a supporter of this literary form. Stay tuned.
Welcome to People and Their Poems podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Carlson, and I'm here today with Deborah Nash Ott of Simsbury, Connecticut. Welcome, Deb.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me today.
Deb was born and raised in Rochester, New York, and holds a Master's of Education in Secondary Education, English. She taught for 35 years in the U.S. and abroad and has led writers' workshops in Bern, Switzerland, and edited the annual creative writing journal Voices for East Granby High School. She has published in various small presses. The poetry volume Twin Soul is Deb's collaborative work with Welsh poet Heather Gatley. Her novella Canopy is part of the Connecticut Indie Book Project, published in the Connecticut Bard Review in 2022. She has also published a children's book with artist Helen Galick in 2016. Currently, she is working on Solid Miss, her first solo collection of poetry. That is quite a diverse and rich resume you've got there. Yeah, but it's amazing. Could we narrow in a little bit? Would you just introduce us to you as a poet?
Yes. As I listened to you read that, I was like, oh yeah, way back when. And I feel a little bit like a dinosaur, but yeah, if you crank it way back, and I've reviewed or kind of covered this in the past, my love of literature came from being one of those reclusive children who loved the books that her mom stuck in her hands. And as a teen, I would write poems in praise of my girlfriends so that they would reread them. And, I got brought into a group of people who loved to have poems dedicated to them. And that was just sort of an introduction to the fact that there was an audience out there, I guess. And then in my 20s and 30s, I was in love with the short story. I took poetry writing classes in university. I was teaching English, but I was honing in on the minimalists of that era, and then my savior and my mentor, Alice Munro, the Canadian short story master. So that drove me for 20 years, short story writing, and I had a few successes there. When I returned from Switzerland, where I was writing primarily short stories, to the United States, I returned to poetry again, and I have to say that it was the place of being in New England, living near a river, living so close to these gorgeous woods. And I returned to poetry because it seems like such a natural landing place to examine natural beauty. Obviously, you've got that language there. You're back in the land of Emily Dickinson, and I had this minimalist tendency in me, but also that narrative desire from being a short story writer. So I hope that was a blend for me. Returning to the United States, falling in love with New England. I'm a New Yorker, upstate New Yorker, so that's not too far away from England, but it is different here. And then devoting myself to poetry. And when I retired in 2020, I joined an international poetry group. And then in 2021, the Connecticut Poetry Society. And then I started a little British group because I have friends from England called Four Ladies. And it's just 4 women, 1 American, me, the rogue American, and 3 British ladies. And we share our poetry online too. So that gives a host to a lot of influences when you have the British voice in there, what they've grown up on, Yeats and Keats and Shakespeare. And I hope to think that informs my writing too.
Got it. Can you just speak a little bit to the experience of what it's like to write in a small group? You talked about having the audience of your girlfriends when you were younger and writing in praise of them and the discovery of audience. What is that like now for you as a writer who's engaging people in very intimate groups, very small groups?
I've gone way past fear. I love getting up in front of groups and reading. And it's not because, I don't know, you could put ego aside. It's just the sharing, hearing the words out loud. And what a privilege that there's ears out there who are willing to sit through and listen. And then because I've had intimate groups in the reading, I'm not filling, assembly halls. There's 5 to 10 people show up. I can pause and stop in the middle of a reading as I switch to another theme. And people will raise their hand, and then we begin this really intimate dialogue about, oh, that really touched me. That reminded me of my father. And I love that part because then you get this contact. And I guess that's what I'm I'm trying to establish all along. I remember I read a poem about a married couple having trouble. I was still quite young. I was breastfeeding my son. I was in Switzerland and I was asked to do a reading. And a man came up to me in tears and he said, you know, you spoke for me. I'm going through a divorce right now. And I had no idea what I tossed out in the room. At the time I was young. I didn't realize that there might be even triggers in the room or people who would be triggered by my words. And it was a gentle poem. It wasn't that I was offensive, but he thanked me for bringing out the element in that poem. So it is gratifying sometimes when you can speak words to people and have them respond.
Yeah, and I find that too with the there are many opportunities to participate in open mics on Zoom, and that seems to be the satisfying experience to have that immediate personal. I can't imagine there's a single person in the world who thinks, well, I'm going to write this poem so it can sit on a shelf between two other books in some library somewhere and wait to be discovered. And what a great way to be heard and to be a part of a real community where the arts are important and help us mediate life, to know that that person was affected, but also for that person to know this stranger to me has been there and can put the words on.
Yeah, and I'm thinking when I jumped into it full blown, when I retired, which was a privilege, you know, retirement brought me all that. I didn't realize the vast degree to which writers support other writers, and part of your job is, you know, just supporting other writers. It could be a review that you throw up on Amazon, which I've done. It could be, you know, contacting them, responding to a poem. I bet you do that almost full time, like a job. And you realize that that community buoys itself up. It's not like the poems are being pulled off the shelf. And then once in a while, you get a nibble, you know.
Yeah. Well, having said that about those poems that wind up on the shelves waiting to be read by a passerby, is there a poem or song that has been especially meaningful to you as a writer of poetry?
It would be Charles Wright, Journal of the Southern Rivers. He's a wonderful poet, and it's just one of those where you're like, I want to write like that, and you keep that poem stuck on your bulletin board, whatever teaching setting you have or whatever office you have. So Charles Wright has been a big influence for me, and Dickinson, you know, and the New England transcendentalists, if you want to reach way back. But, you know, the contemporary poets are doing such fabulous things. I love Tracy K. Smith, Life on Mars, just incredible people out there. Robert Haas, who was at the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival a few years back. Yeah. So there's so many voices right now. And then there's ones that I honor from the 20th century, because that was my formative years.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that you're native of Rochester, New York, and you came to New England, and you know they're not vastly different, but New England is different. Could you just your attraction to place and how place has affected your poetry?
Again and again, I keep returning to this because I have traveled. I mean, I lived abroad for 18 years and then coming back here. I think, was it Melville said, it's not on any map. True places never are. And I think when you're in place and you're looking at a glacier, or you've you know, gone down a ski run in Switzerland, or you've walked along the Farmington River here in Connecticut, it's not only the physical being there, but it's the state of mind you're in. And, you know, in honor of Thoreau, honing those skills of observation too. All of that is a wonderful combination to bring to appreciating place and then bringing yourself into it. And I think we as poets owe ourselves that action to bring ourselves and be present to the place. If it's a walk in the woods, if it's during a protest on the streets, if it's on a gray, horrible night and you're in the bathroom because you're sick to your stomach, wherever you are physically, to capture that place. That's how we honor where we are. New England feels cozy in many ways. Although the trees, I feel protected here. I lived in Denver for 8 years, and that was wide open spaces, and you really felt vulnerable, sort of out there every day, and you had to kind of take Denver by the shoulders and live there and get into the Rockies. So that was a big feeling. And the Alps was also that same sense. So you're kind of almost changing your barometric response to where you are as you get into a place. And then the language comes, doesn't it? The language that will define that place or the people of that place. In my last collection, I wrote about some of the Swiss people who I interacted with when I first moved there. And they were not in love with Auslanders, which would be the foreigners. You know, here we are living in their country and I was trying to be a good visitor, but they will shape, you know, your experience of place too. And so I wrote about them, sometimes disparagingly, but the Swiss are wonderful. They were great with us. Made some dear friends there at the time. But you're observing and you're looking at the people and their place, and sometimes those two, most of the time, are inseparable. So yeah, I think bringing powers of observation, a vulnerability to where you are, and then just picking up the vibe of where you are too, is so important, for me at least, for composing a poem.
You know, what you're saying, Deb, makes me really think about, I think, something that doesn't get mentioned in most literature classes, which is the physical experience of life.
Yeah.
I remember the British education reformer Ken Robinson talked about how in our culture is basically your body exists to get your head from room to room to the next conversation. You know,
that's so cool. I like that.
That being cold half the year is going to shape who you are. Not feeling well and feeling the cold towel floor while you're holding on for dear life, that all of these things need to be honored as well, because they shape who we are and therefore the way we think.
And I think that when we respond viscerally to an area, obviously what we're going through at the time will inform how we write about that. And that I think every writer would agree with. And for me, I have to remind myself to stay in that discipline and not take for granted a thing or a moment or an interaction or a book I've read that sort of stays with me, and then I go out into life and I dip into whatever that writer was saying and bring it with me. When I finished Richard Powers' The Overstory, as I could not walk amongst trees ever again with the same feeling, and I wrote a couple of poems about trees as I started to become sensitive to, or more sensitive to, how trees talk to each other, et cetera. And now there's all kinds of research about it, and you'll hear it on, NPR, people talking about the relationship between trees. Fascinating stuff. And so, being open to that, yeah, always.
The Overstory is a powerful book. And what you're saying makes me think of, something that Neil Gaiman has said, that we are not only our lived lives, but also we are the stories we've been told. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible idea, and it's really, and so we are the poems that we've heard.
Yeah.
Internalize those ideas, and that's physical too.
Yeah.
Your emotional life has a physical place inside your body, and it's connecting with the landscape and the people, and thinking about the suspicious Swiss, not so sure about the outsiders. I think I experienced that in Connecticut too, that people are wary of the newcomer with the question of, are you going to do your time? Are you going to get to know me?
Yeah. Are you? Yeah. Little trust issues there. Oh yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, when we first moved here, we, people were suspicious, lived abroad 18 years. Why'd you sort of land here? And it kind of takes time.
It does. I always joke the Connecticut signs, at the border should say, "Welcome to Connecticut. How long are you staying?"
Yeah, really.
As somebody who's collaborated on a book of poetry, who is in a very different place, thousands of miles away, could you just speak to that collaborative process? What did that look like? Did you collaborate on the poems, the tone? How does that look when you're?
It was a really natural, organic process. My friend has a different style than I do. Heather Gatley is a fabulous writer of Welsh and English roots, but she's lived all around the world, so she's informed by vast travel background. We each had about 30 poems that we had written over the past 10 years, and we sent each other those sets. And then we literally laid out how they correlated with one another, either in tone or theme. We're very, very close. We can say anything to each other. And so it was an open, loving dialogue between the two of us funny things came up. I'd written poems about rivers. She had written poems about rivers. Hers was a river in Wales that dumped into the Atlantic. Mine was the Farmington. So those alignments were perfect. I wrote a poem about a tiger that had attacked a young man. She had written a poem about wildcats in a zoo, in a traveling circus, actually. Those went together. And then the more, abstract ones, we matched for tone. And that was just, again, very organic, just what's that visceral sort of experience as you read the poem, and then what does it do to you internally? So we would match up something about loss, obviously, those are easy to match up, something about childhood, something about alienation, something about going home. And so those matched up easily too. So there was that sensitivity to each other. And when she did the matches, I was thinking right with her. And so when we put together Twin Soul, we really were looking at an American sensibility and a British sensibility divided by the Atlantic Ocean. And yet we have these experiences of the world together. So it was a gratifying experience.
I think that's great. And, the creative as well as the editorial process is determined by the people doing the work. I don't think that's a debatable point at all. I'm curious, where did the title come before you got the collection together, or is it a discovery you made after you did the work on your shared works?
It came on very early because we had often joked, we had known each other for 18 years. We had often joked that she and I are of the same ilk in many, many ways. And so when we would say goodbye to each other, we always felt that there was a parting of a twinning of a personality or a relationship. Two different, a coin with two different sides, but we were kind of melded together by experience, by love of literature, and by, that wistful knowledge that there's a fleetingness about our lives here. And so we've supported each other through some difficult times too, I'd have to say. And because of that, we've felt like we've been together on that level for many, many years. So the title bubbled up very quickly.
Having participated in many open mics on Zoom during COVID and so on, I have found that, you get to see familiar faces.
Yeah.
Really profound that you can get to know people through their poetry in a different way. Mm-hmm. If it were just the quotidian daily encounters at the photocopier or at the grocery, because I think those writers are sharing themselves in a very, very special way. They're vulnerable and they're putting that out there, and there you are to receive it because you're going to do the same thing. And that there's tremendous value in that I've yet to encounter the poem that wasn't good in some way, but people are working on honing their vocabulary, the structure, the content to make it as good as it can be.
Exactly. A few honest, true lines. That's all you want, right?
Speaking of, would you share some of your poetry with us?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation. I pulled out some recent work. I don't know if you go through this, Sandy, where you've gone through a week and it's been a crappy week, or it's been, it's like, meh, and you feel like I'm never going to write a poem again. I don't have it in me. The confidence might seep out all of your pores and you're not feeling it at all. And then you look down and you realize you've knocked off 4 poems over the past 2 weeks. I might even do it on my notes on my phone, and I'm just, in a half dream world at 4 a.m. Obviously it needs a lot of editing after a 4 a.m. poem. Yeah, and then you write a bunch and you're like, well, maybe I'm still a writer. You never know. Here's one about the thing I've been referring to about observation and nature and the New England woods. It's called About Walking in the Woods. It is a natural desire to want to wander, perhaps to ponder that long lost feeling of being a part of things. The fungus on the side of the fallen oak is a rainbow of mineral shades with lacy lip like foot of snail. We look and soak it in, learn how to see the small living world. Maybe a pine branch muscles its way through a thicket of bittersweet, colors dense, the greens, the ripe red berries, husk of yellow. It's like a human life, is it not? This tumble of brambles and growth, messy but beautiful. What compels us might be the sense that souls grow underground, that tree roots conversing form a silent network. Then we might listen and stop walking.
Oh my goodness. Very beautiful. The network, the underground network of souls growing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Again, Richard Powers, and when I'm with the trees and then the fungus and then the tree tips over and there's fungus growing in the tree and it just goes on and on and on. And I love that once in a while I can dip into a decent power of observation.
Well, I think that poem captures it, and this idea that we learn how to see, as you said, and that human life is messy but beautiful. And you just had me with the moss and all that's going on and all the continuity of life and that whole sort of neural network underneath the ground that's holding canopy over our head.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, the McLean Forest. If you don't hear trees talking as you walk through McLean Forest, which is a reserve in Granby, Connecticut, then get hearing aids, because it's a place to be. I've taken people there just random. I'm like, oh, let's go for a walk in McLean. And they come out of there and they're like, wow, so certain forests do that to you. I do walk a lot, and sometimes I just do my neighborhood. And this one came to me just walking my same old loop. It's called One of Three Places. You might find it under the bed, quietly waiting like a discarded tissue, a forgotten sock. Or perhaps on a winter street at dawn, mixed with slush and ice, the morning light daring it to show its face. Then maybe you'll chance upon the thing in the eyes of a stranger, the quick and furtive look. Okay, you sigh, I give up, I'm all out of guesses. Where the hell did I abandon that longing? Left under the bed, or on the street, or deep within those gray and golden eyes, beyond the lashes. That was not the one I thought I was going to do, but that poem came out of being gray and dismal in the morning. I'm sorry, my intro was wrong, One of Three Places. So that one just came to me in terms of a dreary winter morning.
The line about where the hell did I abandon that longing just kind of speaks to me of growing older too. I mean, I felt that line, and this the imagery you use, it is so ordinary and accessible. The discarded tissue, this and the abandoned logging lying beside it just make it's what happens, right? And we go through our ordinary day after day after day, and then suddenly we realize things have changed in ways we could not have imagined.
Yeah, and those dreary winter mornings, I was just reading an article about how to winter creatively, and some of it is a creative work with sadness. That sadness is a way to refine and sort of get hold of and be mature with your life experiences in the winter. And so One of Three Places has longing and sadness in it, but it's also really embracing kind of where you're at right now. So yeah, that one might need a little work, but maybe I better learn how to introduce my poems better. This is the one that I'm sharing now, is the walk around the block about neighbors. And this is called Smoke Rises. Smoke rises from the house behind my own. We share the same lot, same trees, a wandering creek. We have heard one another of a summer night, perhaps, a sneeze, a shout, a loud TV, but never have we spoken. Oh, perhaps a nod exchanged on walks around the oval loop when I admired their grounds. See, on winter days, my own house through the bare trees, its back with looming empty windows. I wonder if they wonder who I am, what shared delights we have in this separate life. Two houses divided by water and land, and when I leave or die, we'll have never known or shaken hands, though we breathed the same air, trod the same pavement, gazed at the same sky.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's just a reality that I think we all experience in terms of, isolation, especially suburbia, which is kind of a deadly experience for some people in terms of the, huge houses on big plots of land. And, people do reach out, and I have some fabulous neighbors, but in Europe, where everyone is all kind of living close together, you couldn't not know someone two doors down, or, in every bit of their life stories. So it's different here. It's really different.
It is. And, living in a condo, it's just really interesting over the years to see how people train themselves to protect their isolation. And oddly, during the pandemic, my neighbors and I joked that we were probably getting through it pretty decently because we had each other to talk to at every move. The dynamic changes when it's the person right next door. Then you don't see them anymore because you want your privacy. So it's just kind of interesting as how the human animal adapts to protect its privacy and also to break that wall.
Yeah. Maybe that's sort of that existential pull and push that we have all the time. Do we reach out or do we withdraw? Is it safer to not be vulnerable and just withdraw, or to reach out and expose yourself? And then you add the other elements of place, of time, of weather, of conditions, and then the stresses and strains of existence. So life ain't easy.
No.
It's a challenge.
Question I often put to my students, and it's in the introduction to my little book there, is, does the world need another poem?
Yeah, really.
And so there's that. And I think for me, the answer is always yes. There's a rhetorical quality to the question as far as I'm concerned, because in the processing of life through language and the gift of our minds and our ability to observe and to look for those right words, we're breaking through that existential isolation that can be so heartrending. And I think maybe it is a miracle that complete strangers will hop on a Zoom to share a poem or two.
That's true.
And is it an ego trip really? Because what you're remembering is your experience of the poems, not necessarily the title.
Yeah.
Half the people hop on with somebody else's name on the Zoom account, or so it's not. There's no great glory coming with that.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, every time you've run these sessions, you're always thanking the participants. It's like, you put the word out there. Thank you for showing up, and for all the horror of COVID. I think that these Zoom gatherings have been a treat and a gift and a privilege to have international voices, people showing up from all over the world. I run one that's 8:30 in the morning here, and in Chiang Mai, where we have a lot of the participants, it's 8:30 at night. So there's this big time difference, and yet they show up, and they show up month after month, and fresh voices and fresh poetry. So it's great. It really is wonderful.
Well, Deb, thanks for all that you do to lift up poets around the world, and for affirming your voice and your dear friends' voices through your writing and making your published work available. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. It's been good.
And it was a privilege, Sandy. It was just a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Take care.
This has been People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. Be sure to check the show notes for any special links relating to this episode. If you want to learn more about the podcast, visit peopleandtheirpoems.net. Or if you want to learn more about Sandy and her work, visit sandycarlson.net. Thanks for listening.